During a night out in Nashville, Tennessee, in December of 2023, 22-year-old nursing student Lauren Johansson was pistol whipped and beaten by her ex-boyfriend, 23-year-old Bryson John Rivers. The young woman's father, respected surgeon Lance Johansson, photographed Lauren's horrific injuries, which left her swollen, bruised, and nearly unrecognizable. In the meantime, Rivers was charged with 2 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, despite the gruesome nature of Johansson's injuries, and her father's warning to the court that Rivers would finish the job if given the chance. The judge overseeing the case lowered the defendant's bond from $250,000 to $150,000. Rivers posted bail in June of 2024 and was released after spending 7 months behind bars. Just 9 days later, Johansson was found beaten to death in her car in Gulfport, Mississippi. Rivers was captured following a 9-hour manhunt and is now facing a murder charge in connection with her homicide. According to the Johansson family, Rivers stalked Lauren for years, breaking into her apartment on at least 1 occasion and causing problems with any man she tried to date. When Lance learned that Lauren had reconciled with Rivers shortly before the beating in Nashville, he concluded that she was suffering from battered woman syndrome, and while there was nothing he could do to stop his adult daughter from making her own decisions, he did everything in his power to convince the authorities that Lauren would be in grave danger if Rivers walked free. Amid his pending kidnapping case, Lauren also reportedly begged the court to keep Rivers locked up, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The failures that led to Lauren's murder are being blamed on miscommunications between the Davidson County Criminal Court Clerk's Office, the Sheriff's Office, and the bail bond company that posted Rivers' bond. As a result of these missteps, Rivers was released on his own rather than to the custody of a bail bond agent. He was also sent to the wrong GPS monitoring company for this ankle monitor, and staff members were apparently unaware that he was not allowed to leave the county. By the time these mistakes were discovered, Bryson was on his way to Mississippi, but Lauren's loved ones remained adamant that the judge's decision to lower his bail in the first place enabled him to commit the murder. Following his capture, Rivers was remanded to the Harrison County Jail in Mississippi with bond set at $1 million. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 17. Model catches lurking stalker. In June of 2021, a 22-year-old Lithuanian model named Gusta Janoshoshkait shared a series of TikTok videos detailing how she caught a creep lurking outside the home she shared with her mother in a gated Florida community. The collection of posts contained a Ring doorbell camera video that appeared to show a man walking around the young woman's home and staring into her window for an unspecified amount of time. In one of her TikTok videos, Janoshoshkait claimed that the police did nothing about the lurker, but the doorbell camera captured footage of the man returning to her home and once again peering through the window. He also appeared to be casing the interior of the house as well as the roof, as if he were making tentative plans to commit a home invasion. In a second video, Janoshoshkait speculated that the suspect had been stalking her for an extended period of time. She based this belief on the fact that he appeared in her security footage the very same day she and her mother installed the camera, as well as the lurker's apparent knowledge of her schedule. Janoshoshkait joked during a future installment of her story about how the man could have easily yanked her outside on the many nights when she opened her window while smoking marijuana. She also described how the suspect set off a booby trap that she had set, which alerted her to his presence. Despite being seemingly aware of this, the man calmly walked away as if he didn't have a fear in the world about being caught. Unfortunately, Janoshoshkait did not receive the help she was hoping for from law enforcement or her homeowners association, even after she uncovered the identity of the suspect, who reportedly had a history of stalking at least one other woman. The suspect stopped stalking Janoshoshkait after her TikTok videos went viral, which happened at around the same time she and her mother moved into a third-floor apartment, where it was impossible for a peeping Tom to peer in from outside. Number 16. Rebecca Garcia and Francisco Garcia. In a disturbing spate of crimes bearing overtones reminiscent of the recently released Netflix series baby reindeer, 33-year-old Rebecca Garcia, and her brother Francisco, currently stand accused of stalking dozens of women in and around the Venezuelan city of Caracas. According to reports, Rebecca, nicknamed the Venezuelan baby reindeer, followed, repeatedly made unwanted contact with, and threatened her targets. In one disturbing incident that was captured on video, a woman who appears to be Garcia can be seen jumping on the hood of a woman's car, putting her hands on the windshield and staring at the woman with an eerie grin on her face. Another victim, Claudia Aguirrazabal, accused Rebecca of breaking into her home and sending her a message stating, "The killer is inside the house." Aguirrazabal also claimed that Rebecca had threatened to kill her friends, covered her entire street in graffiti featuring her name, and had sent her a message stating, "If somebody is touching you, I am going to kill them, as that is disrespectful to us and our relationship." The victim said that she and Rebecca did not know each other, despite the stalker's apparent delusion that they were in a relationship. The show prompted victims in and around the city of Caracas to come forward to law enforcement about the Garcias' alleged crimes against them, sparking an investigation and prompting the siblings to flee the country. But the complaints against Rebecca began back in 2019, and victims have accused police of failing to take their allegations seriously until the uptick in reports following the release of the Baby Reindeer series. A makeup artist named Annie de Trinidad claims that law enforcement failed to take action after Rebecca sent unwanted gifts to her workplace, nagged her constantly on social media, and contacted her from various phone numbers. De Trinidad has accused the police of protecting Rebecca because she's a woman. In May of 2024, Rebecca and Francisco were arrested across the Atlantic at a Madrid supermarket. According to the most recent available updates, Venezuelan officials are in the process of attempting to extradite the defendants from Spain in order to face justice. Francisco's accused role in the crimes remains unclear. Number 15. Jeffrey Herget. In late 2023, a Biola, California resident noticed a man she had never seen before opening her neighbor's gate and letting their dog out. Knowing the neighbor's teenage daughter was home alone and fearing for the girl's safety, she confronted the stranger, who claimed he was a salesman and wanted to give the homeowner a gift, which turned out to be a plastic bag filled with laundry detergent pods. The suspicious man, later identified as Jeffrey Herget, wasn't breaking any laws, but his behavior alarmed the teen girl's mother enough for her to post surveillance footage of the encounter on social media. Local news outlets shared the video, prompting numerous people to come forward with claims of similar strange encounters with Herget. Several people claimed to see Herget walking his cat, leading to suspicions that he was a serial stalker who was trying to lure dog owners. Shortly after the incident in Biola, police in Fresno responded to 2 calls in one day about incidents involving Herget. One resident reported seeing him sleeping in his SUV in a residential area at 3 in the morning, while the other caller claimed that they saw Herget loitering outside Home Depot store and harassing multiple women. Officers spoke with Herget but concluded that there was not enough evidence to make any arrests. During an interview with Fox 26, Herget denied being anything but a friendly, approachable and harmless Christian man who works across the United States as a traveling salesman. A Google search tells a much different story, however. Over a nearly 2-decade time span, Herget has faced stalking charges in at least 8 states, including Arkansas, California, Idaho, Nevada, South Carolina, and Pennsylvania. In 2006, he was charged with felony stalking for allegedly asking inappropriate questions to a group of young women. Between then and 2011, Herget served prison time in Pennsylvania for stalking 2 women and assaulting 2 police officers. Shortly after his release, he was charged with stalking in an unrelated case in Wilkes-Barre. In early 2018, a 19-year-old Arkansas woman accused Herget of approaching her in a vehicle while she was jogging and blocking her with his vehicle after she said she didn't want to talk to him. She ran away only to notice the same man sitting outside her apartment in the same vehicle. The following day, a few days later, the woman claimed that Herget confronted her at a local restaurant. These are just some of the many stalking and harassment allegations that have been levied against Herget over the years. During his interview with Fox 26 in late 2023, he claimed that the accusations stemmed from misunderstandings and his large stature, which he claims has the unintended effect of making people feel intimidated. He failed to provide convincing proof of his career as a traveling salesman and avoided going into detail about his criminal history, but he insisted that the public had no reason to fear him. The publicity surrounding Herget's activities in Fresno appeared to have driven him from the area. His current whereabouts are unclear. Number 14. Jill Sharp. Over a 4-year period started in 2014, Maggie and Steve Patton of Livingston, Scotland, were ruthlessly tormented by a serial stalker with a vendetta against them. The couple accused the stalker, 33-year-old Jill Sharp, of slandering and threatening them using a fake social media account while posing as Maggie's best friend in person. Maggie and Sharp became friends in 2011 through a fan network devoted to the Rangers FC soccer team. About a year later, Maggie met Steve. The stalking began about 2 years later and intensified as the couple's relationship grew more serious. And at the time, the Pattons were unaware that the culprit was right under their nose. In addition to targeting the Pattons with death threats, Sharp sought to destroy their relationship, their friendships with other people, and their reputations. And she even tried getting them fired from their jobs. As a result of the relentless stalking, the couple gave up their season tickets to soccer games, took extended time off from work, and even went on antidepressants. During that same time period, Sharp gushed to Maggie about meeting a man named Graham, who she claimed was planning to marry her. In reality, she had stolen photos and content from a real person named Graham McQuett, who she was not romantically involved with. She went to extreme lengths to keep up the ruse of a loving relationship, claiming that Graham spoiled her with romantic vacations and even using a separate phone to pose as her imaginary lover. The Pattons finally realized that Sharp was their stalker after the Daily Record exposed her fake romance with Graham in 2017, leading to her subsequent arrest. They were at a loss to come up with a motive for the crimes, leading them to conclude that Sharp tried to ruin their lives because she was jealous that they had found happiness together. Sharp claimed that she targeted the Pattons because she believed they had helped expose her stalking of Graham, but the evidence showed that she had it out for the couple even before she hijacked Graham's identity and claimed to be engaged to him. She also used at least one other false persona to harass the Pattons, indicating that she stalked them for reasons beyond what she was willing to share with law enforcement. In 2019, Sharp pleaded guilty to stalking causing fear and alarm. She was sentenced to a year in prison and has stayed out of news headlines since then, offering a hopeful sign that she left her victims alone and hopefully has not bothered anyone else. Number 13. Gavin Plum. 37-year-old British security guard Gavin Plum was first featured in the media for his appearance in a documentary about obesity in 2018. He's now making headlines for even less flattering reasons as news circulates about his history of attacking and stalking women. The allegations against Plum date at least as far back as 2006, when he reportedly tried kidnapping 2 flight attendants on a train as part of a stewardess fantasy. He tried to force the women into compliance using a fake gun and was ultimately handed a year-long suspended prison sentence. Just 2 years later, in December 2008, Plum attacked 2 teenage girls in a stockroom at a Woolworths store where he worked. During his trial, the court heard about how he held the victims at knife point with a box cutter and taped one of the young women's hands behind her back. The victims managed to escape and Plum served a 16-month prison sentence. Starting in 2014, Plum began cyber-stalking celebrity TV presenter Holly Willoughby. His posts about her were so depraved that many of them were not even read out loud in the courtroom when the case eventually went to trial. Plum also interacted online with at least one other man who had previously been jailed for stalking celebrities. In a series of disturbing voice notes, he detailed his plans to attack Willoughby and her husband, TV producer Dan Baldwin, at their home. He described how he would knock the couple unconscious using chloroform to make them both easier to restrain. The next step involved choosing some outfits he thought Willoughby would look good in and abducting her. Once he had gotten his satisfaction, Plum planned to kill Willoughby and dump her body in a lake. Thankfully, none of these sinister plans ever came to fruition. An undercover officer in the US gained Plum's trust over the internet and learned about his plot, then alerted the FBI and authorities in Britain. Law enforcement raided Plum's home in Harlow, Essex, and seized evidence indicating that he had every intention of carrying out his plan. In 2024, Plum was found guilty of soliciting murder and other charges related to the case. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 16 years. Number 12. Nina Tiptaft. An English man and woman's lives were turned upside down after they befriended a young woman named Nina Tiptaft in 2018. Tiptaft became obsessed with the couple and began pestering them practically non-stop with unwanted correspondence, including handwritten letters that were sent to the pub where the female victim worked, along with emails, calls, and social media messages. On some days, the victims were contacted upwards of 100 times. Alarmed by Tiptaft's behavior, the female victim attempted to distance herself from the culprit, but the unwelcome contact continued, prompting the couple to seek help from the police. A community order was issued banning Tiptaft from contacting the victims, but she violated it within days. Several months later, Tiptaft was arrested for repeatedly violating the community order. She received a 6-month suspended prison sentence for 2 years and was ordered to attend drug rehab. Just 4 months after that, she bombarded the female victim's workplace with endless phone calls along with emails from a fake account. In the calls and messages, Tiptaft threatened to burn down the pub where the woman worked and to kill both victims. The female victim was so terrified by the threats that she became scared to leave her house. Tiptaft's behavior inevitably landed her back in the courtroom, and in April of 2024 she was sentenced to a year behind bars. During her sentencing hearing, the judge noted that the 24-year-old had not expressed a desire to stop haranguing her victims, which naturally begs the question of whether she'll leave them alone following her release from prison. Number 11. Joshua John Moore. In October of 2018, a Linwood, Washington man, identified by police as 30-year-old Joshua John Moore, showed up at the Rogers, Arkansas home of a female Twitch streamer he had been stalking for at least a year. The victim told police that in the time leading up to Moore's appearance at the residence, he had sent her countless emails containing threats to assault her and kill her boyfriend, along with unwanted gifts including lingerie. In one message, Moore threatened to put the victim and her family into a garbage bin, light them on fire, and blow the woman's face up with a hydrogen bomb. According to law enforcement, Moore attempted to serenade the victim from outside her home in a yellow raincoat and with flowers in his hand during the early morning hours. While being taken into custody at around 3:30 a.m., he reportedly told police that his name was One Love and claimed that the victim invited him over. Inside Moore's wallet and backpack, officers found a Greyhound bus ticket and photos of the woman. The victim told police that Moore told her he was on his way to Arkansas to marry her. When he arrived, he sent her a photo of himself at the Fayetteville bus station. He then walked to the woman's home, where he put on the bizarre musical display that he thought would win her over. Following his arrest, Moore was held at the Benton County Jail with bail set at $20,000. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 10. Jessica Robbins. In a disturbing saga dating at least as far back as 2014, a 32-year-old Tampa woman named Jessica Lee Robbins was accused of stalking Chris Cornell, the lead singer of the music group Soundgarden. According to law enforcement, Robbins harassed the musician and his family on social media, with many of her posts targeting Cornell's wife. In May of 2016, she was indicted in New York on a federal charge of interstate stalking. Robbins was fitted with a GPS ankle monitor and given a court date. She was also ordered to stay away from Cornell and his family, but she cut off her tracking device and failed to appear for her hearing, prompting federal authorities to issue a warrant for her arrest. At the time, Soundgarden was touring throughout the United States. Knowing that Robbins was on the run, the band increased the security at its concerts out of a concern that she might show up. And as it turned out, they made the right move. 2 months after skipping out on her court hearing, Robbins was arrested near a concert venue in downtown Louisville, Kentucky on the night of a scheduled Soundgarden performance. Records show that a woman of the same name and age as Robbins was released from federal custody more than 2 years later in September of 2018, indicating that she served prison time for her crimes. She regained her freedom more than a year after Cornell tragically died after a performance in Detroit, Michigan, and has remained out of the media ever since. Number 9. William Nolan. For years, 64-year-old Debbie Wearing Jones trusted her neighbor William Nolan and his wife to feed her cats and water her flowers at her home in Birmingham, England, during her weekly trips to Nottingham to visit her partner. When she discovered listening devices attached to the underside of her coffee table and the headboard of her bed in 2020, she had a hard time believing that Nolan could be the culprit. Determined to identify the person responsible, Jones installed security cameras inside her home and waited for someone to come and retrieve the listening devices. She made her regular trip to Nottingham and watched from afar as Nolan entered the home and collected the bugs. Before calling the police, Jones confronted Nolan, who denied the allegation that he had bugged her home. Left with no other choice, she turned to law enforcement and Nolan was arrested for the disturbing breach of privacy. He admitted to 1 count of stalking without fear, alarm, or distress and received a 15-month jail sentence. During Nolan's sentencing hearing, the judge described the defendant's actions as one of the most severe examples of stalking he had ever seen. After knowing and trusting the Nolans for upwards of 30 years, Jones shared similar sentiments. She described losing sleep over the betrayal and the continued fear that there might still be listening devices lingering inside her home. In the aftermath of the case, she made it her personal mission to raise awareness about stalking by encouraging people not to trust anyone. Number 8. Ashlin Cruz. In May of 2023, a 24-year-old Mulberry, Florida woman named Ashlin Cruz accused the man of taking photos of her young daughter at a UPS store. The man denied the allegation and handed Cruz his phone to prove that he hadn't taken any pictures of the girl. She nevertheless reported her suspicions to Polk County deputies, who found no evidence of any photos being taken. According to law enforcement, Cruz, who worked as a telecommunicator for the neighboring Osceola County Sheriff's Office, went to the man's residence shortly after the incident and snapped pictures of the house that he shares with his wife. She was also accused of sharing the couple's personal information on social media for malicious purposes after finding no evidence of the couple committing any wrongdoing. Police arrested Cruz on suspicion of grand theft, accessing an electronic device without permission, stalking or harassing, and 2 counts of filing a false police report. Records show that she's currently serving an 18-month probation sentence for misdemeanor stalking. Number 7. Emily Bolio. In September of 2020, 23-year-old Emily Bolio of Newbury Park, California, was arrested on suspicion of falsely accusing her ex-boyfriend of assault, claiming that the man had threatened her with a knife and a gun on 2 separate occasions. About a month earlier, Bolio told police that her ex had recently traveled to her home from Reno, Nevada, and threatened her with a gun while on parole for an unrelated crime. The following day, she called the detectives assigned to the case and claimed that the man had entered her home and tried strangling her with a plastic bag. Bolio said that her ex fled the scene on foot after being confronted by a family member, prompting an intensive manhunt of the area surrounding her residence. Law enforcement failed to track the man down, and a warrant was issued for his arrest on suspicion of attempted murder and domestic violence. Later that day, police in Reno arrested the accused attacker, but it wasn't long before authorities in Newbury Park received information from civilians and law enforcement in Nevada, indicating that Bolio may have fabricated the allegations against her ex. She also fell under suspicion for making false allegations against the man using fake social media accounts, threatening him and his family, and orchestrating several recent swatting incidents at his home. After determining that Bolio's ex was not in California at the time of the alleged assaults, the authorities vacated his arrest warrant and released him from custody. Not long after that, Bolio was arrested for trying to get a restraining order against the man based on false allegations. She was charged with stalking, perjury, and reporting a false emergency and was held at the Ventura County Jail with bail set at $110,000. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 6. Vishal Vijapura. Over a more than 6-month period beginning in 2020, more than 120 victims were stalked and terrorized by a British man in his late 20s named Vishal Vijapura, who compiled a list of dozens of potential and actual targets. According to authorities, Vijapura tormented his victims anonymously from the comfort of his South London home using multiple social media accounts. He also made disturbing posts trying to justify why he preferred to take a woman by force rather than engage in consensual intimacy, and spent hundreds of dollars on Ancestry and other databases in his efforts to learn additional details about his victims, then used the information to intimidate his targets. In a message to one victim, Vijapura wrote that he planned to attack her at her address and post footage of the assault online, and whenever one of his victims blocked him, he continued harassing them from other social media accounts. Vijapura was arrested in January of 2021 after multiple complaints from victims triggered a months-long investigation into his crimes. Detectives tracked him through his IP address, proving that he wasn't as savvy of a criminal as he seemed to think. During a search of his electronic devices, detectives found 8 spreadsheets consisting of nearly 200 names, at least 150 of which were traced to actual real people. In 2022, Vijapura pleaded guilty to 7 counts of stalking involving fear of violence. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison and received a lifetime ban against contacting any of the names on the list that law enforcement found in his phone. Number 5. Chad Michael Bustow. In August of 2023, a 43-year-old transient named Chad Michael Bustow showed up at a Drew Barrymore interview in Manhattan and charged toward the stage while shouting that he needed to meet with the 48-year-old actress while she was in New York City. Barrymore left the stage and security guards removed Bustow from the venue. Just days later, Bustow was caught going door to door in an apparent attempt to locate Barrymore's Southampton, Long Island home. During that week alone, he was arrested 3 times for stalking Barrymore, but he walked free after each arrest because misdemeanor stalking is not a bailable offense in New York State. The judge overseeing Bustow's cases ordered him to wear a GPS monitoring device, but he never showed up for his scheduled fit-in. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but he continued to roam free until his next run-in with the law about a month later, when he was accused of stalking actress Emma Watson at a fashion show. According to reports, Bustow trespassed into the dressing room area while yelling about how he wanted to marry and take a selfie with Watson. He became irate and threw a tantrum while being removed from the scene by security. A quick look at Bustow's criminal past is enough to raise concerns. Classified by law enforcement as a drifter, he's been arrested in multiple states for various offenses including trespassing, indecent exposure, and disorderly conduct. Bustow reportedly has a history of unusual behavior, including a handwritten lawsuit he filed in 2023 claiming to be the rightful owner of the Hilton Hotel chain. In another civil case, he claimed he was fighting for the freedom of all criminally accused individuals in all prisons on planet Earth. He also filed court documents filled with Pokemon cards and tried to sue his parents for conceiving him and forcing him to exist. According to the most recent available updates on Bustow's legal situation, he was charged with stalking, 2 counts of trespassing, and 2 counts of disorderly conduct in connection with his behavior toward Barrymore and Watson. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 4. Roger Alvarado. Given Taylor Swift's level of fame, it's perhaps not surprising that she's had more than one stalker. In what was perhaps the most disturbing case of an obsessed Swift superfan going overboard, a 22-year-old Florida man named Roger Alvarado was arrested and jailed for repeatedly breaking into the singer's New York City townhouse. During the first home invasion in April of 2018, Alvarado climbed a ladder onto Swift's 2nd floor terrace in Manhattan's Tribeca neighborhood and smashed a window in order to gain entry into the residence. While inside, he napped and took a shower. He was arrested after a neighbor tipped off police about the suspicious activity. Alvarado spent 6 months behind bars for the crime and was at the beginning of a 5-year probation sentence when he once again climbed a ladder onto Swift's patio in March of 2019, just 30 days after his release from prison. This time he used a concrete block to smash through a glass door. He was caught and charged with stalking, burglary, and felony criminal contempt for violating an order of protection banning him from contacting or going near Swift while detained at the Manhattan Detention Complex, infamously known as the Tombs. Alvarado told the New York Post that he didn't regret breaking into Swift's home and admitted that he would probably try doing it again if given the chance. He denied being a superfan, noting that he normally listens to hip-hop, and said, "I don't want to hurt her. I just wanted to speak to her, to talk to her. She seems nice and cool." When a reporter asked Alvarado why he didn't try to approach Swift in a less threatening and criminal fashion, he said, "Oh, I didn't think of that. I guess I should have done that first." He reached a plea agreement the following month and received a 2 to 4 year prison sentence in exchange for pleading guilty to violating his probation. Records show that Alvarado was paroled in May of 2022 after serving roughly 3 years behind bars. Number 3. Frank Andrew Hoover. One of the first Taylor Swift stalkers to make news headlines was a Texas man named Frank Andrew Hoover, who was accused of sending threatening emails to the singer's father in 2015 and 2016. Hoover implied that he believed he and Swift were destined to be together, stating, "Without her, I walk the earth alone forever, and she'll continue to experience failed relationships that break her heart." His emails gradually became more threatening over time, as he repeatedly failed to obtain his desired response from Swift's dad. In one message, Hoover described the singer and her loved ones as an evil family of devils and talked about ending them. Swift obtained an order of protection banning Hoover from contacting or going within 500 feet of her under any and all circumstances. In October of 2016, Hoover was arrested in Austin, Texas for violating the order by going near Swift's motorcade. He was ultimately sentenced to 10 years of probation, and the no-contact order remains in effect. On more than one occasion, various individuals have been arrested and or detained in New York and Rhode Island for lurking near Swift's homes. The most recent incident occurred in January of 2024 when a 33-year-old Seattle man named David Crow was arrested outside the singer's apartment in Manhattan's Tribeca neighborhood. Officers responded to the scene after receiving reports about a disorderly person trying to force open the door to the apartment building's lobby. Less than 3 days later, Crow showed up at Swift's apartment building again and was arrested a second time. Just minutes after being released on his own recognizance and leaving the courthouse, he walked to Swift's building and was arrested for a third time, at which point he was finally detained without bail. Crow was charged with multiple counts of harassment and stalking, along with violating a protective order, but he was deemed mentally unfit for trial. The criminal case against him was dismissed, and he was remanded to the custody of the state's Office of Mental Health, which arranged for him to receive inpatient psychiatric care. If Crow's mental health improves, prosecutors will have the option of resurrecting the charges. Today's topic was requested by Joan Tarpley Hashish, Kelly's homemade kitchen and granny preps. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Daniel John Valtier. In January of 2024, 56-year-old Daniel John Valtier of El Paso, Texas, was arrested outside the famous singer Shakira's Miami Beach home on suspicion of stalking. Just days earlier, Shakira's security director had provided law enforcement with copies of disturbing social media posts that Valtier had made about the Colombian crooner. In one post, he wrote about how he planned to marry Shakira and open a business with her. He also claimed to know Shakira's children and that he planned to adopt them. Prior to Valtier's arrest, the singer received several packages from the suspect, including wine and chocolates. Shakira's security team told Valtier to stop sending gifts and making online posts about her personal life, only to discover days later that he had ignored their warning, this time writing that he planned to visit Shakira at her home. Valtier showed up at the residence shortly before 1 o'clock in the morning and was promptly taken into custody. In addition to the stalking charge, he was hit with one count of hiring a vehicle with intent to defraud and failing to pay a $70 taxi fare. During his first court appearance, Valtier defied the judge's order to stay away from Shakira and to stop contacting her, saying, "She's my wife. I speak to her all the time." Records show that he is no longer in custody, but the case remains open. Valtier is due back in court in late December of 2024 for a status hearing. If these diabolical and obsessive stalker cases couldn't get any worse, then stay tuned till after number 1 for when cowards go wrong, if you haven't seen it yet. Number 1. Anthony McCrory. In November of 2011, a man in his late 50s named Anthony Lewis McCrory was arrested in Marysville, Michigan for aggravated stalking. It was hardly his first brush with the law. His criminal history dated back to 1980, when he was convicted of assault for shooting his girlfriend in the knee. McCrory served a decade in prison for the crime and landed back behind bars in 2000, when he was sentenced to 5.5 to 7 years for aggravated stalking. At the time of his arrest, there were 10 orders of protection in effect against him. Less than a year following his release in 2006, McCrory was arrested on another aggravated stalking charge. He represented himself in court and the case was dismissed. Corey also represented himself during his trial following his aggravated stalking arrest in 2011. This time, he was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. In a disappointing twist, he won a new trial in 2015 after successfully arguing in an appeal that the judge who oversaw his case failed to warn him of the risks and pitfalls of acting as his own attorney. Over the following months, McCrory defaulted to an old strategy of trying to fire his court-appointed lawyer, claiming that his attorney was Satan. But the judge refused to entertain the request, leaving him with no choice but to stick with his assigned representation. In July of 2016, McCrory was resentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison, with credit for roughly 5 years of time served. He passed away the following year at the age of 65. A Staten Island couple got into a contentious argument at their Dongan Hills apartment on March the 10th of 2016. As tensions escalated, 23-year-old Jeffrey McDonald unloaded a fury of punches to his girlfriend's face and body. As was subsequently determined by the county medical examiner, McDonald struck 23-year-old Elisa Johnson with such force that he actually severed a vertebral artery in her neck. Despite the young woman being in obviously critical condition, the man left her at the apartment. He dialed 911 and emergency crews were sent to the scene, but Johnson ultimately died at the hospital, with the official cause of death later being ruled as blunt force trauma. In the aftermath, McDonald was indicted on 2 counts of manslaughter, 1 in the first degree and 1 in the second degree. He agreed to a plea deal which led to the first degree charge being dropped and him receiving a prison term of 4 to 12 years. During his 2017 sentencing hearing, McDonald issued an apology to Johnson's family, but the presiding judge later indicated that he didn't see an ounce of sorrow in the statement he made. The judge then punctuated the proceedings with a stern admonishment of McDonald's actions, saying, "You battered a defenseless woman who weighed 107 pounds. That makes you pretty low. In my book, that makes you a coward." Number 6. Peter Nowacek. In December of 2021, Vancouver women Jamie Coots and Genevieve Thomas were at the Coyote Lounge Bar in the Mexican resort city of Playa del Carmen. Another woman they were with was being badgered by a man, even after she said she wasn't interested multiple times. Eventually, Coots and Thomas stepped in on the woman's behalf, and the man initially relented his incessant pestering. However, he quickly turned around and charged the group of women, striking Thomas square in the jaw. The force of the punch was great enough to send her falling backwards, causing her to hit her head on something and briefly lose consciousness. The assailant then zeroed in on Coots, whom he punched in the face, breaking her nose and knocking out one of her teeth. Good Samaritans subsequently brought Coots and Thomas to the hospital. The women's attacker, who was identified as a professional boxer from Ontario named Peter Nowacek, was detained by police. According to the Quintana Roo Attorney General's office, Nowacek was charged with attempted murder in the wake of the incident. Number 5. Raymond Jury. In the early hours of January the 30th of 2019, a member of the rogue chapter of the New Zealand prison gang known as the Mongrel Mob was mercilessly beaten to death by a man he once considered a brother. As was detailed in the High Court of Rotorua, 58-year-old Raymond Jury, a fellow mongrel mob member, went to Trevor Rikihana's residence, where he violently beat, kicked, and strangled the homeowner following a heated argument about money. Rikihana reportedly begged for Jury to spare his life, but his pleas were pitilessly ignored by his hulking assailant. The victim survived for up to 35 minutes after the final blow was delivered, after which he succumbed to his injuries. Rikihana's niece, Lauren Eketone, reported hearing her uncle pleading for his life, followed by a barrage of stomps and kicks. Eketone subsequently fled the semi-rural Ohata property with her son, believing their lives to be in danger as well. Presiding Judge Paul Davison described Jury's ferocious attack as cruel, callous, and extremely violent. The justice went on to label the man's actions as cowardly, stating he'd used his superior size and strength to overpower an individual completely unable to defend himself. Following the announcement of Jury's punishment, life imprisonment, the public gallery erupted into chaos, with many of the defendants' family members and supporters hurling insults at the judge. Number 4. Isaac White Carter. On November the 12th of 2022, 19-year-old Bianca Palomero was working at the Habit Burger Grill in Antioch, California, when she noticed a group of men bullying a colleague's special needs brother. The young woman intervened on the boy's behalf, at which point the men shifted their aggression towards her. Shocking CCTV footage showed one of the suspects deliver a vicious blow to Palomero's face, sparking a brawl that came to involve multiple other customers. Another Habit Burger Grill employee eventually pulled Palomero away from her attacker, who continued shouting and knocked a potted plant off the countertop. The man and his 3 acquaintances subsequently left the store and sped away from the scene in a silver BMW. Although Palomero was rushed to the hospital, it wasn't in time for doctors to preserve her right eye, which had been critically damaged by the assailant's barrage of punches. Following a weeks-long manhunt, local authorities tracked down the suspect, identified as 20-year-old Isaac White Carter. The latter was taken into custody on felony charges of mayhem and aggravated assault causing great bodily injury. White Carter appeared in Contra Costa County Superior Court in early December of 2022. A GoFundMe campaign was launched in support of Palomero's recovery efforts. As of the latest updates, the page had raised over $130,000 to help cover the young woman's medical bills. Number 3. Gavin Lewis. East London woman Sandra Samuels was murdered by a man with a history of violence against women in September of 2019, as was heard during proceedings at the Old Bailey. The 44-year-old had allowed vagabond Gavin Lewis to stay at her Stoke Newington flat. It was a decision born of sheer kindness, but which ultimately proved fatal for Samuels. 41-year-old Lewis overpowered the small and slight woman, unleashing a vicious attack despite her offering him shelter and food. When the 19-minute assault finally came to an end, the man locked the front door to the flat and left the scene, where Samuel's lifeless body remained until police found her 2 days later. While Lewis awaited punishment for Samuel's murder, the prosecution provided details regarding his previous instances of unprovoked violence against women. Back in 2010, he'd allegedly punched a woman inside her East London apartment and struck her over the head with a wine bottle. 2 years later, Lewis was accused of beating his girlfriend at her home in Islington. Judge Nigel Lickley called the defendant a violent man who posed a threat to any woman who found themselves alone with him. For Samuel's killing, Lewis was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Number 2. Abu Munahim. Shortly after escaping an abusive relationship, 17-year-old mother of one, Eloise McDermott, started seeing a man by the name of Abu Munahim in May of 2021. By December of the following year, Munahim was behind bars for a campaign of abuse and harassment he inflicted upon the vulnerable young woman, who was treated worse than a prisoner during the course of their relationship. The sickening details of the couple's tumultuous history came to light during a hearing at Minshall Street Crown Court in Manchester, England. Prosecutors revealed that on one occasion the pair were walking home after a night out with friends when Munahim suddenly started attacking McDermott for something she'd said earlier. He punched her in the face and ribs and she fell to the pavement, pleading with him to stop. The man, who was almost 10 years McDermott's senior, continued the vicious assault and told her he was going to kill her. Each time the young woman attempted to flee, Mahim would send her back to the ground until eventually she managed to run into the middle of the street and flag down a truck driver. Mahim dragged her back into the bushes as she tried to get into the vehicle, at which point the driver called the police. In another incident, the man beat and strangled McDermott until she passed out. She subsequently checked herself into a hotel because she couldn't bear for her mother to see her black eye and bruised ribs. Mahim didn't leave her alone, however, further threatening to petrol bomb her house and throw acid in her face. For another domestic episode, Mahim was jailed for 7 weeks, but upon his release, he called McDermott to say, "Watch what happens now." He showed up at her house in the middle of the night, openly flouting a non-contact order against him, and even threatened to harm her young child if she didn't do as he asked. The Greater Manchester man was eventually arrested again, and he subsequently pleaded guilty to coercive behavior and assault. The presiding judge described Mahim as a coward with utter contempt for women. He was jailed for 4.5 years and given an indefinite restraining order, precluding him from making any form of contact with McDermott ever again. Number 1. Billy Chememere. In November of 2021, Kenyan man Billy Chememere was brought to trial accused of murdering at least 20 elderly women in North Texas. The man's initial run-in with the law came in 2010 and 2011 when he was convicted of drunk driving, for which he was given short custodial sentences in order to pay fines. In the summer of 2012, Chememere was taken into police custody yet again, this time for assaulting his then-girlfriend. 4 years later, he was arrested for trespassing at Edgemere Retirement Community in Dallas, to which he pleaded no contest. According to testimony given in court, Chememere would pose as a medical professional or maintenance worker to gain access to older women's homes. Once inside, he'd smother his victims with a pillow before making off with some of their valuables. In March of 2018, Chememere's pernicious campaign of violence against the elderly of North Texas was brought to an end when 91-year-old Mary Annis Bartell survived his attack. She told the police that a man had broken into her apartment, tried to suffocate her with a pillow, and stolen some jewelry before fleeing the scene. Bartell's assailant was ultimately identified as Chememere, who was subsequently linked to the murders he'd committed. His first trial ended with a deadlocked jury, resulting in a mistrial. The retrial commenced on April the 25th of 2022. During the court proceedings, family members of several of Chememere's victims made impact statements. The daughter of slain 81-year-old Miriam Nelson called the accused serial killer a vile coward who preyed on vulnerable elderly women. As of June of 2022, Chememere had been indicted on 22 counts of capital murder, although North Texas authorities indicated that his victim count might be higher than originally believed. In October, having been convicted of 2 of the murders, he was sentenced to life in prison, and his remaining charges were subsequently dropped. Thanks for watching. If you could choose, would you rather become an A-list celebrity overnight or obtain the power to literally turn invisible whenever you wanted? Let us know in the comments section below.